Hello and welcome to episode 280 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm James Whittingham. This is a special episode. Brian's on assignment, which means he's probably napping. Well, good for him. He's retired. We have a special interview this week with Brett Dolter from the University of Regina. But before I get to that, I have to apologize because I made a big mistake. I trusted AI, which I think is trying to kill me. In our last episode, it came up with 60,000 tons of hydrogen in northern China could produce 200 terawatt hours of electricity, which would be massively beyond what our grid in Saskatchewan needs. Here, where we broadcast from, talk. And yeah, it's wrong. It was wrong by a factor of 100, so it's only 2. We had a person who seems very knowledgeable with hydrogen write us a letter, and we'll get to that on the next regularly scheduled episode. But right now, we have a special episode talking to Brett Dolter. Brett is an associate professor at the University of Regina in the Department of Economics, where he teaches courses in climate change policy, microeconomics, cost-benefit analysis, and ecological economics. His research is focused on modeling the costs and consequences of climate and energy policies. One of the few people around here knows anything about this stuff. So I thought I would ask him about why we're not doing anything. Why us? Why we've done 280 episodes, and we're talking about all this progress, and yet we've done so little where we live, where Brian and I live here in Saskatchewan. So, Brett, welcome to the show. Brian and I are obsessed with the Netherlands, who I think is up to like somewhere between 18 and 25% of their grid is from solar, and they're about the same place on the planet as we are. How come we can't do just a little bit here? You know, I don't understand.
So, yeah, it's an interesting question to see, like, where is Saskatchewan relative to the world? As you say, we have some of the best capacity factors here for solar and for wind. We really do have an incredible resource for wind. You know, along with all the other Great Plains states in North America, we have windy days all the time, and we should be able to harness that. So we actually have really low cost wind. Solar, same thing. We have some of the best solar in Canada. I think we'd have to look at a few reasons why Saskatchewan wouldn't have made as much progress. One might be just our market situation where we have SaskPower, the monopoly corporation. If you've got one organization making decisions, they might have more of a conservative mindset than an open market. Alberta, we see a bigger investment in renewables because anyone can develop a project. Well, you used to be able to develop a project, and you used to be able to sell into the grid. And there might also be something there around electricity prices. So I actually don't know off the top of my head what the average price would be in the Netherlands for electricity. We have had fairly low prices, maybe in an international level here in Saskatchewan. If you look at California, where we're looking at 35 cents a kilowatt hour, versus here where we're still below 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So there's some possibility that we're still competing against low cost options, and the low cost options in Saskatchewan have been coal. We've built these plants and they've been burning coal and just chugging along, and then gas plants. We had a plan. I mean, SaskPower had a plan to get to 50% renewable capacity by 2030. I think that plan is now no longer in place because I haven't heard them talking about it lately. And it actually becomes a lot harder to put more wind and solar on the system if you have a bunch of coal instead of what the plan was, which was to replace coal with gas plants and then have wind and solar in place there. So, I mean, there's a few factors. You know, when I think about the way that SaskPower thinks about renewables, they're looking at it to see, does it compare to the price we pay for the fuel going into our power plants? So they don't really think of it as like a one-for-one replacement. You can't necessarily take a gas plant, replace it with a solar field. But the way they think about it is, what are we paying for the fuel and then carbon pricing on the fuel in our gas plant? And how does that compare to the price of solar or wind? And wind now for a number of years has been cheaper than buying gas, especially with the carbon price in place. Solar, as you know, it's been coming down in price. Utility scale solar is cheaper than the residential rooftop solar. So SaskPower has started to take some baby steps towards investing in those utility scale to large projects. I mean, they're now talking about a 100 megawatt plant, solar field down by Estevan. So I think they're starting to see the economics, or they were. But we had this disruptive event as of January, there's the global disruptive event of the U.S. election, but then in our province, there's this disruptive event of deciding we're going to break 2 federal laws, actually probably 3, and just keep running our coal plants. And so that has changed the mix once more. SaskPower, I think, was looking at wind and solar as something that made a lot of economic sense. It was low cost, replaced fuel, zero emissions. And now they're being told to keep the coal plants running, which really messes with what they had been planning. Gas plants and solar and wind work really well together. Coal plants and solar and wind, not so much.
So there was a solar plant planned for Northeast Regina that was 10 megawatts from Kruger Energy. It was announced in 2020, and it was going to come online at the end of 21 or into 22, and it's gone now. I contacted them, and SaskPower hasn't announced the cancellation of that. As far as I can tell, I haven't seen any news coverage or anything in their press releases. But what types of challenges would people run up against when they're trying to put up a solar farm near Regina, just a small one?
Well, I mean, we have this issue, the historic SaskPower Act. So by legislation, when SaskPower is established, they're given a monopoly over the electricity sector. And that means you can't build anything unless SaskPower has asked you to build it. And they've issued a request for proposals to get you to build in a specific location. So I think that means it's up to SaskPower how fast they want to roll out renewables. And because SaskPower is a crown, we also have that, there's a big influence from the provincial government and the cabinet and the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation to say whether one plan or another makes sense. So I think that's the big challenge. You can't just say, hey, this looks like a good project, we're going to build it. You need that go ahead, that green light from SaskPower to say, we want someone to build it, and then you have to compete to be the project proponent who actually builds it. So it's sort of a 2-step process that starts with SaskPower initiating things. So I think, that's one constraint. There has been some examples. I think the Saskatoon or the Saskatchewan Solar Co-op has had some success with building solar to supply industrial processes, industrial facilities, and just doing it behind the fence where they're not having to sell to SaskPower and then have the other company buy from SaskPower. They're just generating the solar, which means you're lowering the need for that company to buy from SaskPower. And that's a bit of a workaround that the Saskatoon Co-op has made work. So that, it's not going to lead to big, 10 megawatt or 100 megawatt projects though. So, no one facility is going to need that much.
No. Getting back to the Netherlands, I just looked it up. It was 0.23 euros per kilowatt hour, which is roughly maybe 50% more than what we pay for retail. Is that right?
So a euro is 1.63. So if we're saying, what was it? 2.23?
2.23 roughly, yeah.
38 cents a kilowatt hour. So we're looking, probably about over double electricity prices. If you're having to buy at 38 cents a kilowatt hour, then solar's, even with a low capacity factor, solar is going to make a ton of sense. And if you have an open market where you can do that, I'm assuming in the Netherlands, someone could build a project and just bids into the market. It's not like a crown corporation situation. So yeah, they're kind of up there near California prices, so that 35, 40 cents a kilowatt hour, and probably Saskatchewan will be there in not too long when SaskPower looks at their future supply options. They have talked about how they're all more expensive than anything we've built in the past. Even when they're building the gas plants, I don't know what's been happening. Maybe it's the COVID supply shocks and those disruptions, but it's now a gas plant is twice as expensive to build as it used to be. So there's going to be more expensive electricity in the province for most things, for all the thermal plants or all the dispatchable plants, which does again, speak to the potential for more renewables to play a role. But realizing that renewables really again, that SaskPower logic is we are taking fuel away from these plants. Every time a wind turbine spins, we can turn down the gas plant and have it run less. We burn less natural gas. And so they're still looking at it on that fuel basis. So, I mean, one thing that could drive more renewables in Saskatchewan is if the federal carbon price stays on industrial emitters. In Saskatchewan, we've told all the industrial emitters that our price is now $0 a ton, but the federal price is still $95 a ton. And at $95 a ton, I think I could check the numbers, but you are talking about fuel that's, at least looks like, at $2 a gigajoule, and at $95 a ton, you're looking at $45 a megawatt hour fuel and carbon price for a gas plant, which is about the cost of wind. So right now, you're kind of breaking even as soon as the carbon price goes up at all. Like wind is cheaper, and solar would soon be cheaper. Solar in Saskatchewan is a bit more expensive than wind, but wind, the levelized cost is still sitting. Let's see, I've got it around $41 a megawatt hour.
Okay.
So yeah, carbon pricing will be important. If Saskatchewan is told by the federal government and the Supreme Court again that we have to have a carbon price, then that really means wind and solar remain highly competitive against just the fuel portion of a gas plant, just burning that fuel.
Okay, well, the Netherlands has, like Australia, 1/3 of the rooftops, residential rooftops have solar now. And I imagine the payback period's faster when you have high electricity prices. When I got my solar in 2018, the installer was projecting a 5% increase per year in power rates. And that seemed possible because we seem to have regular rates go up, 5% here, 6-7% there each year. There was 1 year I think it went up twice. Why has it stopped going up in price? They seem to have kept in.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look at SaskPower in the first quarter of this fiscal year posted $136 million loss. So they've stopped increasing rates, but really they need to increase rates in order to not be going into debt and to break even. So I think right now you see the flavor of the day in politics is the cost of living and affordability. And so I think you have political pressure to keep utility rates low, even if they really should rise in order to cover the costs of operating SaskPower. So there's some pressure building up there. I'm not sure how long we could be okay with, if that keeps on, we're talking about a $500 million deficit at SaskPower at the end of the year. That's huge. So we've got to look at what those rate increases need to be. And, that's tough these days. People do face the cost of living challenge as inflation has hit everything else. So it's going to be tough to see those rates increase. And there's ways we could maybe alleviate that. The provincial government had been telling SaskPower, all of the money we collect in the industrial carbon pricing system, we're going to put into a fund and we're going to let you use that for your investments. And so you can keep rates lower that way, keep rate pressures from being as high. That's one option if we realize, hey, we do have to have this carbon price in place. Another option we could look at is to change the way rates work. And so right now, you and I in our homes, we pay a pretty modest monthly charge, $30 around there. And then we pay this electricity rate around 15 cents a kilowatt hour. The way that that's designed is kind of out of date. We could change it so that that electricity price that's measuring the cost of energy is lower, which would actually encourage electrification, encourage more people to drive electric vehicles because that price becomes even lower, and increase that monthly charge. And so there are jurisdictions that are looking at that. California had a look at that. The idea is that most of the electricity system is this fixed capacity that has to be there for peak demand. It doesn't matter the usage day to day. You're paying for all of the plants that have to be there on the dark night in December when the turkeys are in the oven and the Christmas lights are on and you're using all this power. So you've got this fixed cost that really means our fixed charge should be higher and that per kilowatt hour charge should be lower. Maybe it's 8 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which again encourages electric vehicles. That would change the way we look at electricity, makes it cheaper to use, cheaper to electrify. Also, though, would change the economics of the rooftop solar. So this has been SaskPower's complaint about rooftop solar. They're saying you're being rewarded at the residential rate, but really our rate design isn't what it should be. Really, we want to give you, 6 to 7 to 8 cents a kilowatt hour, but we're giving you in effect 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So they're not happy with people being compensated at that residential rate because they know the rate's design is not as it could be. So that actually straightens out that problem where we then have solar competing without any cross-subsidization. They'll say the word cross-subsidization, the idea that those people that have solar, they get paid too much, and then everyone else has to pay more on their electricity to support the solar people. So if you change your rate structure, you get away from that being an issue. You can also look at changing the rates in a way where, you move to the higher fixed charge, but that is income tested. So if you're low-income households, you pay a lower monthly charge, and that's going to mean we help with the affordability issues. Higher income households who have enough to spare would pay that full charge that's required. So there's different things that can be done to change rates and change the way rates are designed so that when we have rates that are required to pay for a system, we don't have these affordability challenges.
Okay. So when it comes to our climate, is it true that wind turbines have to be shut down at -30? Someone from the government claimed it was -25. Do you know which it is?
I'm not sure the exact number. I have heard that before. I believe there's research into changing that, improving it so we can have them functioning at lower levels. I think I've heard in the past there was talk about you'd have to actually heat the thing, but I think that was an older technology. But yeah, I'd have to go dig around and ask an expert in the turbine technology to see what happens there.
From what I understand, it's a cold weather package will add to the cost of the turbine and take away the the levelized cost of electricity because you have to use some of the energy to heat the gearbox, whatever that little room is called at the top where the gearbox is, and the inverters and the blades have to be de-iced. And then they'll function only to -30, from what I understand. So if I assume that wind, because of our, seasonality of solar, would have to play a major part of decarbonizing Saskatchewan. I sent an email to Mark Jacobson at Stanford and said, is this true? He still says that wind, water, and solar can solve our problems, and he hasn't modeled Saskatchewan. But I'm always kind of fascinated by the three prairie provinces because we are so cold. There's 6 million people here, and our family drives electric cars, and you can tell that they're not really made. They could tweak them a little bit. They could add warmers or insulation to the batteries to make them more efficient in the heating in the winter and different things. You can tell things aren't necessarily made for our climate. And my co-host has a heat pump, and Biden had this kind of prize for heat pump companies to increase the lower the temperatures that they work at, but nobody's going to make one for -40. I mean, it seems like it could be possible. I'm talking about air source, of course, here. So is your view that if we want to decarbonize building heating, it has to be ground source heat pumps, or how would we possibly approach that here?
Yeah, I mean, there are these challenges in places that have really cold winters, and Saskatchewan, Alberta, Winnipeg, we're all in that category. I think on the electricity generation side, we know we can build facilities like gas plants that keep running at cold temperatures. Texas, when they had their big outage a few years ago, part of the problem was that their gas plants froze up and weren't functioning at cold temperatures. So they obviously weren't equipped with what they needed to be equipped with. So I think there's a possibility to, as you say, tweak designs and make it work in cold climates. I mean, if we wanted to be leaders in this field, there's probably room for us to look to innovate there, do the research to figure out how do you build the cold weather wind turbine and how do you build the cold weather heat pump and the cold weather EV. Likely our market is so small that the big companies haven't been paying as much attention to that, to say, well, we could do all this research, we're only going to sell to these 6 million people. But it is a challenge. So I now have an air source heat pump, and I didn't get rid of my natural gas furnace. It's still the backup for cold days. which is...
See, my co-host is just using electricity, basically a resistive heating furnace. So he's getting a bill that's like $800 more than he used to get. And that's not, what anyone's going to do.
Mhm.
But you're just using natural gas, which seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
As a backup.
Yeah, it's part of the challenge. Like air source heat pumps. Actually, I'm going to be doing a talk on Wednesday, October 1st for the Energy Management Task Force. It's a Saskatchewan group talking about the economics of EVs and heat pump adoption. And so one of the things I've looked across the country to see how air source heat pumps look from an economics perspective. Like, do you get a payback? And there's a lot of places in Canada where you do. The places where temperatures are a little milder.
Most of the population.
Yeah, most of the populated areas like Southern Ontario, BC, you're okay. And it depends what you're switching from. So if you're switching from heating oil in Atlantic Canada, you're saving money. If you're switching from resistance heat, this baseboard heat, you're saving money. But it's only in these, Alberta and Saskatchewan and potentially some of Manitoba, you have this low cost natural gas. Used to be a little higher cost. We had a carbon price. Now it's rock bottom prices again because there's no carbon price. We've got low cost natural gas and the cold winters. And those two things mean that you're going to pay extra for the air source heat pump and the electric heat. Makes me think that part of the innovation that's needed in our cold prairie provinces is to look a bit more at the district heating options. Like, can you, or at least scaling ground source heat pumps? Can you find ways to scale up the installation so that we have a machine that can fit in people's backyards and can do the boreholes and get those ground source heat pumps in place and scale it so that machine is always busy so it doesn't have to charge as much to work? I think that would be one thing to explore, to see, could we drive more adoption of ground source heat pumps, which then reduces the need to have a backup. And SaskPower would be happier also because their peak is still winter peak when it's really cold out. And if everybody has switches from natural gas to resistance heating, then that peak really goes up and then they're not too happy. But if you're switching to the ground source heat pump, that keeps the edge off that peak.
Okay. As an aside, did you have trouble finding an installer? Because it seems like a prairie problem when people try to go the heat pump route, that there's not really the experience there.
Yeah, I mean, I did find an installer, and I used an installer that another person I'd met had used. So they at least, I knew that at least one. I think it is still a new technology. You can tell when the install people are there to do their work. I was just having them back in to put a humidifier onto the ducts, and it took them a while to figure out why isn't this working. They needed a little bit of an extra piece there to switch the voltage on something to make it work, and they just didn't have the familiarity with it. So I think there'd be some learning involved, and I think that's priced in. So you're going to pay a lot more for an air source heat pump now, when any company that puts it in has this learning curve to figure out, okay, we don't know what we're going to run into. We better put some padding on our cost, and hopefully over time that gets driven down as more people adopt these things.
So I was kind of curious to try and find some place that gets as cold as us, and some people mentioned Finland, and I didn't really think that, they've got a current that moderates their temperatures most of the country. So I looked at northern China, which there's not a lot of information on, and it's kind of hard to do that. But there's been some projects that they've done that are happening right now where they're putting up wind and solar in a place, I think it's Manzula in the autonomous region of North China. And I looked it up, it's colder than us. It gets frequently colder. It's less sunny in the summers, or less warm. It's kind of wet. And they're making green hydrogen. And I don't know, I kind of have some hope that maybe they'll have some technology out of China, northern China, since they really do want to decarbonize that region. And they also want to encourage electric vehicle use there. So they've got a new battery that works to -50. It's more expensive and less energy dense, and it is just a different sort of recipe with lithium. But I want to ask you some things about, if you can candidly answer some political thoughts, because you used to work for government, did you not? Did some consulting?
Yeah. A while back, I worked for the Ministry of Environment 2006 to 2008 here in Saskatchewan.
So we've got this listener in Japan who happens to be a politician. He also happens to be from Saskatchewan, but 35 years ago, he graduated, went to teach English. He stayed there like many people do. And now he's the equivalent of an MLA. So he got himself invited to an event that our premier and his chief of staff were at when they recently went to China. They stopped in Japan, apparently, in Tokyo. And he had some FaceTime, just a couple minutes with the premier and then much more with his chief of staff. My listeners said, I put in a few jabs about the lack of chargers in Saskatchewan, and the staffer completely agreed. And he writes, to be blunt, the government could provide subsidies to install chargers on the main highways, but until now they have felt the cost in political points would be more expensive than the public money to be used. The staffer mentioned something about the political climate and the average Saskatchewan voter. Does that mean that politicians of any stripe are just not going to be able to push renewables because the voters are against it here?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if the voters are against it. So, I mean, I recently asked people in Regina.
You've done some surveys, right? And
I did some surveys.
Fairly positive.
Yeah,
response.
Regina residents asking them. So the city of Regina has a 100% renewable by 2050 target, and sometimes when they talk about it as like our operations, but I think the meeting that was council voted on, I think it was more like the whole city, all of us electrify, we get to 100% renewable. So asking people whether they support that, there's still in Regina 2/3 support for that. And if you look at that broader goal of let's get to 100% renewable, it was 2/3 support in 2019, it's 2/3 support now. So that's held fairly constant, but it has become a bit more polarized. So some of the Progressive Party voters, those who would see themselves more aligned with the federal Liberals or the federal NDP, are now increasingly likely to support that target. And some of the people who are aligned with the federal Conservatives are increasingly likely to oppose it. So there's been this polarization develop in the past 6 years around renewables. It didn't used to be there. It used to be more broadly accepted. And so there's something that's gone on in the Conservative voters' minds that has turned them away from thinking about renewables. I mean, we see the way that President Trump talks about renewables. He doesn't like wind turbines. He's called green energy some sort of a hoax or something at the UN last week. So there's this poo-pooing of renewables in certain circles. And I think that's changed. When Saskatchewan, under Sask Party government, created this goal of 50% renewable by 2030. And that was the Sask Party's goal. And so there was a time when a right of center party could look at renewables and say, yeah, these make a lot of sense. They're decentralized. The benefits are all throughout rural Saskatchewan. They're getting increasingly cheap. We can integrate them into our system because we have these gas plants now. And so there was an alignment there, and something has changed, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but something has changed, at least in the surveys I've done here in Regina. Now, on a national scale, thinking about the charging networks, we have this situation in Canada now. For all your Canadian listeners, they're probably aware that we had that zero emission vehicle regulation that said manufacturers had to sell a certain quantity of zero emission vehicles, basically electric vehicles, by 2026. They're supposed to sell 20%. If they didn't, they'd have to buy credits from other companies, probably like a Tesla would be selling credits because they're 100% electric. And that's been put on pause for that 2026 year. Now there's talk, it wasn't canceled, and there's this talk of revisiting it, redoing it. And so that might be an opportunity. There's been some folks like Clean Energy Canada who are saying, when we bring that policy back, let's bring it back, and let's give the car manufacturers an opportunity to get credits if they install chargers. And so you're not meeting your target, well, make up for it by installing charging throughout the country. So if that policy gets locked on with the zero emission vehicle mandate, that might be a good way to unlock charging. And I worked with a student here at the University of Regina who looked at why do people adopt EVs or not. And charging is important. People's perception of whether they could charge on a trip, if they have charging in their home. So will you be able to find a charger, and will the charger be working? So is it you're going to show up and it's broken? So that high quality charging network, I think, is that important piece that we do need to drive even higher adoption of EVs. And I hope we see it in a revamped zero emission vehicle policy, along with maybe some other changes, like letting in more of the European models of vehicles that are also lower cost electric vehicles, and thinking a bit about, should we have 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, or should that be a little lower, which might also benefit our canola farmers here? So I'm hoping that there's going to be a window where nationally we create some good policy that gets a better charging network built out, and hopefully the car manufacturers are part of that, and that they're seeing they're being asked to invest in that, and then that helps drive their sales.
All right. Well, that's everything I wanted to ask you. I appreciate your time once again, Brett. I appreciate making the time for us this week, and I hope to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for the invites, and great to chat.